Good morning, East Bay. What is happening in Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano counties? Learn about what's happening in our communities, an in-depth conversation so you know what's going on. We're talking to government, economic, political, nonprofit, and business leaders here in the greater East Bay. I'm Jared Asch, the host of the Capstone Conversation. Welcome to today's episode of the Capstone Conversation. I am joined by Timothy Burroughs, from Stop Waste Alameda. Timothy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jared. It's my pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about Stop Waste and then about yourself, and we'll dive in from there.
Stop Waste is a government agency in Alameda County. We've been around since about 1976, so almost 50 years now. And our main job is to help the jurisdictions within Alameda County advance their environmental sustainability goals. We do that through a combination of policy and programs and services that help communities reduce waste, prevent waste, recycle more effectively, compost more effectively. And we also do that by removing barriers to investments in energy efficiency and decarbonization of building. We were formed by all of the jurisdictions within the county. So we're what's called a joint powers agency, which is sort of a boring bureaucratic term. But JPAs can serve a really exciting purpose. And in this case, we were formed to help all of the jurisdictions in the county, the 14 cities and 2 sanitary districts, and the county government itself, help all of those jurisdictions advance environmental sustainability within Alameda County. And our county is a leader throughout the state and beyond in the work that we do to protect the environment and achieve other benefits for the communities that we serve as well. So that's Stop Waste. Our offices are in downtown Oakland. We have a wide range of tools that we use to do the work that we do. I'll give you just a few examples. We provide annual grants to nonprofits and small businesses and schools and other institutions. About $1 million a year in grant funding is available to enable community-based organizations and businesses to reduce waste. We do outreach campaigns. So one of the outreach campaigns we do is to help community members make the most out of the food that they have, so that we're preventing food waste, which is one of the main sources of waste that enters the landfill. We provide a lot of technical assistance throughout the county. So for example, if you're a restaurant that wants to reduce the amount of plastic foodware that you're using, we can come in and provide some funding and some assistance to help that restaurant transition to reusable foodware that prevents waste from entering the landfill and can save that business money. We also have a really robust program for schools. We do environmental education in K through 12 schools in every school district throughout the county. I've met many people who went through that program when they were younger and really gained a lot of value out of it. So that's some of the things that we do as a agency. I myself, I've worked here as the executive director for about 3 years now. I have a long background focusing on the environment and helping to improve community quality of life. I started way back in the day as a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, which was where I was really inspired to invest more in policymaking. I worked at a very grassroots level, and I was inspired there to come back to the US and see how I could scale up the work that I was doing at a policy level. So I worked for a time at the US EPA in DC, and there I learned I really wanted to work at the local government level. So I worked for the city of Berkeley for about 15 years and helped oversee their environmental programs and climate action planning. And I was the director of the planning and development department of the city of Berkeley as well. Amazing experience. Berkeley's where I live. I have a lot of love for Berkeley. And then transitioned recently to Stop Waste, and I'm just feel completely privileged to be in the role that I'm in here at Stop Waste.
Amazing organization, got a lot going on, and we're going to dive into that further today. And we're also going to talk about life cycle of trash. We're going to talk about public policy. We're going to talk about how your cities and you as individuals can help make a difference. And if you're in Solano, if you're in Contra Costa County or anywhere else listening to this, don't just think because Tim is in Alameda County that this isn't for you to be listening to, because we're going to be talking about statewide policy areas and statewide anything. he's just a great organization and a great guy to do it. And as you notice for our listeners, we're trying to rotate between the three East Bay counties and hearing speakers from all over. Tim, let's dive into some key policy things that people should be aware of. First, there's three bills we're going to look at. I believe these are all things that are enacted now. There's first SB 1393, which is the concept of the three bins, right?
Yeah, it's SB 1383, which was passed into law in 2016. And SB 1383 relevant to everyone. Sometimes we feel like policies at the state level, how do they actually impact us? How do they affect us on the ground? But SB 1383 is incredibly relevant in a number of ways. First of all, its focus is on reducing the amount of organic material that goes to the landfill. And when I say organic material, I mean things like food waste and food scraps and yard trimmings and yard waste and food soiled paper. When those materials go to the landfill, they break down and they produce a really powerful greenhouse gas called methane. So SB 1383 is ultimately a greenhouse gas reduction law that's focused on reducing the amount of waste that goes to the landfill. The goal in SB 1383 is a 75% reduction in organics by the year 2025. So ambitious, aggressive targets. And it really puts local governments, cities in particular, in charge of helping. One of the things that it requires, as you mentioned, Jared, is that for all residents and businesses and multifamily properties throughout the state, up and down the state, have to have a 3-bin system: a organics or compost bin, a recycling bin where you put your paper and some plastics and aluminum cans and cardboard, for example, and then also a landfill bin or a garbage bin, a 3-stream system. The idea there is you want to make it as easy as possible for residents and businesses to dispose of these materials in a responsible way. Sort those materials by the residents so they go where they belong. And you don't have organic materials going to the landfill. You don't have recyclables going to the landfill. And also you don't have garbage going into the recycling or garbage going into the organics. So SB 1383 really is designed to create that 3-bin infrastructure throughout the state. Now in Alameda County, we've been collecting food scraps for over 20 years. So Alameda County and other counties in the Bay Area have really been a leader in diverting organics from the landfill. And now what you're seeing is sometimes when local governments take action like that, it influences up to state policy, and you start to see those requirements happen statewide. So our role is to help jurisdictions, though, at Alameda County to help achieve the goals of SB 1383.
What is the process for that composting the organic materials so it's not releasing methane off into the air?
Really good question. So there's a whole infrastructure needed to collect and transport and process and then dispose of materials, depending on the material, either through recycling or through composting or in the landfill. And the system that we're talking about and that you're asking about right now, we refer to this system as being downstream. And what I mean by downstream is if you can sort of imagine or you can picture a stream of materials that start from extraction of resources and minerals and oil and gas to produce that material and manufacture it, transport that material to consumers and the communities that use it, and then it's used and then it's disposed of downstream. There's a whole system downstream that is designed to collect that material and dispose of it effectively. So what you're asking about right now is the downstream system. And I think later we can talk more about the upstream system, which actually has a lot of environmental benefits and economic benefits as well. But let's focus on the downstream system for a second. You asked specifically about composting. The compost bin that we all now have, what goes in that bin is food scraps, yard waste, and food soiled paper. Those are the only things that go into that bin. And like I said, in our area, we've had a robust infrastructure for collecting those materials for some time. And it's really important to put those materials in the compost bin or the organics bin, because what happens is those materials are transported to a compost facility. We have a couple in eastern Alameda County. There's others that are in the Central Valley. And those materials there at those facilities, they break down into compost. And that compost is then applied to farms and vineyards and backyard gardens and parks. And compost is just sort of a miraculous material. It returns nutrients to the soil, right? And then the soil then helps feed the plants, feed those nutrients to the plants. Compost also promotes carbon sequestration in the soil. It helps with moisture retention. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of benefits to compost. And it's really important because we're using that material to help grow the food that we consume. It's really important to keep that stream clean. What we put in those green bins has to be the stuff that's only allowed to be in there, because we're then applying that product ultimately to the food that we eat. And similarly, it's really important to keep food waste and yard waste out of the garbage, because like I already said, that stuff then creates methane in the landfill. All that stuff we put into the green bin gets trucked out, it goes through a process where it breaks down to produce this wonder material called compost, which then helps us grow our food and grow healthy foods. There's a beautiful circularity to the composting system that we try and accelerate and advance here at Stop Waste.
I want to hit on another policy area, SB 343. Is that correct?
Yes, SB 343 was adopted in 2021. The author was Senator Ben Allen. He represents Southern California, the Santa Monica area. And 3 was a really important law that does affect this downstream system that we've been talking about so far. So if we take a step back and we think about recycling, recycling really gained a lot of steam in California in the 90s. There was another law called AB 939 that set statewide diversion targets for all jurisdictions within the state. And at that time, it was a different world, right? The volume of materials that were entering our communities, especially the volume of plastic, was lower. And also the complexity of those materials was less so. It was less complex. And over time, what we've seen, and I know you've seen this, Jared, everybody has witnessed this, maybe especially during the pandemic, it was especially apparent. The volume of materials that are entering our communities, disposable single-use materials, has really skyrocketed. And all of those materials, many of them are made with lots of different types of plastic and lots of different types of resins, which makes them hard to recycle. And ultimately, it's made it difficult for that solid waste system, the system that collects these recyclables and transport them and ultimately converts them into new materials. It's been hard for that solid waste management system to keep up with the volume of materials that are entering the community. And it's been hard for that system to separate materials when packaging is made up of such a complex mix of stuff. So the recycling system that we have is, I would say, it's strained and it's imperfect. It's almost like the human condition. I feel that way about myself. I'm frequently strained and I'm always imperfect. I'm trying to get better, but I'm strained and I'm imperfect. And the recycling
He's married
system,
with teenagers, folks. So that put it in perspective. I get it.
That's right. I mean, aren't we all a little strained and imperfect? So if I could personify the recycling system, that's sort of how I would personify it. But I would also say it's trying to get better. And I'd say that about myself as well. So you have this complex system that is kind of strained and imperfect. And then in the meantime, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, Jared, we have more and more consumer confusion about what's actually recyclable. What should we put in which bin? When I look for the symbol on that plastic bottle, what number should it be? What should that tell me? What do those chasing arrows mean? Where should I put that material? That label on a given material is actually been quite misleading, right? There hasn't until very recently, until SB 343, which now I'm coming back to, until SB 343, there was no standard for when that chasing arrow symbol could be applied to a given material. But there's no standard. You can put that chasing arrow symbol on almost anything. It would be like if there was no standard for when you can call something organic. Well, it might be to my benefit to call a food that I'm producing organic, so I'm going to go ahead and put the organic symbol on it. But you can't do that, right? There's high standards for what can be called organic. Until recently, until SB 343, there was no standard for when those chasing arrows could be applied. We've all been very confused as consumers about what's actually recyclable, and SB 343 is designed to help with that confusion. It's designed to bring credibility to that symbol so that we as consumers, we don't have to do a research project every time we want to know how to dispose of a given material. We can know that if it has those chasing arrows on it, then we can be confident that that material is actually, that's what SB 343 is designed to do. And the state has since then gone and done a lot of research to actually identify a range of materials that they've determined to be recyclable, right? At this time, and that list will evolve over time, but the state has recently released a list as required by law of materials that are currently deemed recyclable. And those are the materials that are then able to be adorned with that chasing arrows symbol.
And we're going to come back to some of that conversation about the arrows, what's recyclable and that life cycle. I want to hit on one more bill because it continues to talk about a little bit of what you're doing, and that's SB 54, which, if I'm correct, talks about packaging in food waste having to be shifted over to all compostable by 2032. Did I get that right?
Yes, and I'll just fill in a little bit more about that, about the bill, so that we're being comprehensive about what that bill does. So that's SB 54, also authored by Senator Ben Allen, which was passed in 2022. And right now, that bill is in the process. The regulations for that bill are in the process of being defined. So the bill was passed, and now there's a regulatory process that further defines how the goals of the bill will actually be implemented. And that bill says a few different things. One is, it says that by 2032, the amount of packaging, single-use packaging, and plastic single-use foodware, so all types of packaging, and specifically plastic single-use foodware, the volume of those materials has to be reduced by 25% by the year 2032. So there's a source reduction. We call that source reduction because, as opposed to recycling, which is downstream, what D4 is requiring in part is actually reducing the volume of materials upstream. So the amount of materials that are actually entering our communities has to be reduced. In the meantime, all single-use packaging and plastic single-use foodware must be recyclable or compostable by the year 2032, as you said. So we have to reduce the total amount that's entering our communities, and whatever amount is left over has to be recyclable or compostable by the year 20. And then for plastic in particular, plastic packaging and foodware, there's a specific recycling rate that has to be achieved. Plastic packaging and foodware has to achieve a 65% recycled rate by 2032. So everything has to be recyclable, and 65% of the plastic actually has to get recycled. What's unique and what's energizing, I would say, about SB 54 is it places the responsibility for implementation of that law on the producers themselves. So instead of you and I, consumers and ratepayers, paying the cost of the infrastructure needed to recycle more material and find new markets for new material, it's really the producers of the material themselves that have to meet these targets, including the source reduction targets as well. And what that does is it empowers producers to innovate in whatever ways they can to increase the recyclability and compostability of these materials. It doesn't tell producers how they can achieve these targets or how they must achieve these targets, but it says these targets have to be achieved, and the cost of achieving those targets cannot be placed on consumers. And one thing we should note, Jared, is that I mentioned sort of the volume, the increased volume of all of these materials entering our communities over time. It costs communities a lot of money to handle the flow of materials that are entering our economy, right? It costs money to set up recycling infrastructure and composting infrastructure. It costs money to pick up litter that plastic pollution causes. And let's be clear about where the main impact of plastic pollution is. Like with many environmental impacts, the people that suffer the most are the folks that are most disadvantaged and most underrepresented in policymaking. So SB 54 is also designed to mitigate some of the existing plastic pollution that already exists in the communities that we live in and that we serve. It creates a $5 billion fund that producers of plastic packaging have to pay into to clean up the existing plastic pollution, especially in disadvantaged communities up and down the state. So it's a comprehensive law. It's known as Extended Producer Responsibility, EPR. An extended producer responsibility shifts the burden to the producers of the packaging and away from jurisdictions and cities and ratepayers to achieve these environmental goals.
That's really helpful. And I think that's ambitious where California keeps leading because then California and the European Union both have, stronger requirement than the feds in this country. And as packaging gets redesigned, it will make a significant impact, right? If it doesn't need to be thrown out, if it could be composted, it never goes to that landfills, which, like you said, are in some lower income communities,
Mhm.
right?
That's absolutely true. And I mentioned earlier about how local policy often informs state policy. What's also true is that state policy, especially in California, having an economy a size that's much larger than most countries in the world, California policy affects state policy in other parts of our country, and it actually affects policy throughout the world. And California is enacting laws right now that really get to the heart of how we can make our recycling system more transparent and accountable and more effective. SB 343, like you mentioned. And California is also adopting policy that really advances this concept of a circularity. And circularity is one of those foundational concepts. And maybe I can just define that for a second, Jared, because
Yeah.
it's really fundamental to a lot of the work that we do. So I like to talk about circularity in a way. There's an analogy that I like to use, and I've heard many other people use this analogy as well. So say you walk into your bathroom and the tap is on in your tub and the tub is overflowing with water. The first thing that you do in that case is not to grab a mop and start mopping up the water on the floor, right? The first thing that you do is you turn off the tap. You turn off the flow of materials that are the flow of water that's entering the bathtub and overflowing onto your floor. And it's a good analogy for the circular economy because what laws like SB 54 are attempting to do is really shift our economy and turn off the taps, slow the flow of materials that are entering our communities, in this case, packaging and the concept of SB 54. And for the materials that continue to enter our communities, for there to be circularity, for those materials to continue to circulate through reuse and repair and refill, so that the life of those materials is extended and there's economic benefits that are reaped from how each of those materials can have an extended life. For example, the shirt I'm wearing right now, it's one of my favorite shirts. I got this shirt at Goodwill. The shirt that I'm using, somebody used it before, maybe somebody used it before that person. Goodwill and is a great example of an institution that believes in circularity, right? It keeps the material circulating. This shirt could have gone to the landfill after the first person that used it. I also could have just gone to another store and just bought a brand new shirt made from virgin materials. But in buying this shirt, I did my one small infinitesimal part at reducing the need to extract new materials and create a new shirt by reusing the shirt that I'm wearing now. And in the process, there's folks that are employed at Goodwill that hope to clean this shirt and stock this shirt and sell it to me. So there's an economic benefit as well. So that's what I mean by keeping materials circulating in the economy. And then finally, an important part of circularity is the recycling system and composting system that we mentioned before. Ultimately, there are times when a product has reached its end of life. We're unable to circulate it for reuse or repair. And so recycling can play an important role there, but only after we've emphasized the benefits of reuse and repair and upstream circularity. And so that's really what SB 54 is attempting to do, is reduce the volume of materials that enter the community and then keep materials circulating through reuse, repair, and ultimately recycling. So SB 54 is a circular economic law.
Well, and I'll point out my t-shirt today that I wore specifically thinking about this is from Banana Republic, and it says on the tag it's from 100% recycled plastic bottles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the ways that recycling is used to create, a feedstock, right? So the plastic bottle is ground down into pellets. And then there's a market for those pellets, which in this case, it was Banana Republic, to take that feedstock and then whatever their manufacturing process is to use that feedstock to create a new material. And that's a good example of the potential value of recycling. Now, what I would point out is that it does take a lot of investment of energy and water and other materials to create that, even that recycled t-shirt, right? It does require resources to create a t-shirt even out of recycled feeds, but there's a benefit there. It's even more beneficial if when you're done with that shirt, Jared, and it still has, good use in it, for you to then keep that shirt circulating through, thrift stores or other organizations so that we can minimize the amount of waste that's going to landfill and also minimize the amount of demand for new materials entering our economy.
Well, we try to donate, and it came up on our episode with the president of the Contra Costa County Community College, where they created at Diablo Valley a interview wardrobe closet. I have started saving old dress shirts that might not be in mint condition or just might not be in style for me. Instead of me just going to Goodwill with it, or Salvation Army, good causes, I can drop it there. And then a student can turn around and use that for a job interview who might
That's
not
really cool.
otherwise be able to afford a nice shirt.
That's very cool. I love that. I love that example.
Talk about like the blue bin for a minute. And there's like a lot of rumors out there, right? Half the stuff that people are throwing into the blue bins isn't actually be recycled a little bit. Another rumor is what goes into the blue bin then gets shipped all the way back to China with the diesel on the ships and the trucks and everything. Like, are we really saving anything here? Or there's not as big of a market. So like your point, especially in COVID, things went up in the blue bins, all the boxes from Amazon and Target and everything else. And so there's more materials than there is consumers for those recycled products. So it's actually just ends up in a landfill. 3 questions, but all sort of similar. If you can maybe shed some light on that process.
For sure. Yeah, I'll do my best. So I think maybe where we can start is we can talk about, I mentioned earlier that the list that Cal Recycle, the state government, recently released a list of material that are currently deemed to be recyclable. Why don't we start by talking a little bit about what that list looks like? And I think, inquiring minds want to know what is actually recyclable right now in the state of California, right? And again, we're talking about this downstream infrastructure. Then maybe we can talk about how is defined. How did the state actually come up with a list of materials that they deem to be recyclable? And how do they define recyclable? And then what does that mean for consumers who worry, like you said, that maybe first of all, they don't know what they should put in the recycling bin. And maybe second of all, they worry about what happens to a material once it goes in the recycling bin. So I'll try and weave all of those together. And then you can tell me if I missed anything that you want to make sure that we talk about.
Yeah.
So the state recently released this list. This list was required by law, SB 343, like you mentioned earlier, of materials that are currently deemed to be recyclable. And here broadly are what those materials are: glass containers, aluminum cans, right? You drink a can of Pepsi or something like that, you can put it in the recycling bin and know that it's very, very likely to be recyclable. Paper and cardboard, some forms of plastic. So a lot of people will look at, like I said, those chasing arrows, and they look for that number in the middle of those chasing arrows. So some forms of plastic are recyclable. And the types of plastic that the state has deemed to be recyclable are the number ones, which are things like a soda or a water bottle. A plastic soda or water bottle is on that list. Number twos, which are things like your milk jug, like a gallon milk jug, is a number 2. And then also number 5s, which are things like a thicker plastic yogurt container. So those are the categories of plastic that are currently deemed to be recyclable. There's several things that are not on that list. For example, plastic bags, or what we call film plastic, like flimsy plastic that makes up a bag, or that plastic that's on an envelope so you can see the address. That is not recyclable. Things like plastic, garden hoses, diapers, not recyclable. A lot of us want the milk carton, the cardboard milk carton to be recyclable, but actually those are mostly coated with plastic and are not on the recyclability list. Things like plastic utensils. We might wish that those are recyclable, but plastic utensils and diapers and garden hoses and all of those things, they actually are disruptive to the mechanics of the recycling system. They cause problems in the mechanics of the recycling system. And it's actually really important that we try and keep those out. Otherwise, the facility that sorts these materials will sort those out anyway. And we sort of refer that as sort of like, if you put a material in the recycling bin that ultimately doesn't get recycled, ultimately it's just taking the long road to the landfill, right? It's being sorted out of the recycling stream and it's put into the landfill stream. So that gives you kind of a snapshot broadly of the materials that in California are recyclable. The next key question then is, how did the state come up with that list? Why are some things recyclable and some things not? And like I mentioned before, the state has defined recycling now to help with consumer confusion and to set some requirements around what materials can have those chasing arrows on them. Because like I said, until recently, there was no standard for those chasing arrows. And so what we were experiencing was a lot of greenwashing. If I can stamp something with those chasing arrows, I will. But now there's a standard under SB 343. And here's the standard. In order for a material to be deemed recyclable, it has to now meet two criteria. One of those criteria is that at least 60% of the state's population must have access to a program that collects that material for recycling. Essentially, that material has to be collected for recycling by 60% of the state's population, by cities that serve 60% of the state's population. So it's sort of a population-based metric. The second criteria is that the material must be sorted and into a specific defined recycling stream by the facilities that sort materials, and those facilities must serve at least 60% of the state. So there's two 60% metrics. 60% of the population has to recycle it or just put it in the recycling bin, collect it. And then the facilities that serve 60% of the state have to then actually sort that material so that it actually gets sent to a market where it can be created into a new material, right? But 60% and 60%. If a given material does not meet that threshold, so say, for example, plastic bags. Plastic bags are not currently accepted in most jurisdictions' recycling programs, not even close to that 60% threshold, because they're very difficult to recycle with the current systems that we have now. And similarly, the facilities that collect those materials and sort them, they are not sorting plastic bags into their own separate streams so that they can be recycled. If plastic bags come into those facilities in the recycling stream, they're actually disposed of in the garbage instead. So if a material doesn't meet that threshold, then it cannot be stamped with those chasing arrows, and it's not deemed recyclable. So that's the standard that now exists in the state of California. All of that is designed to reduce consumer confusion. I know if it has that chasing arrows on it, I know it's actually being recycled in most communities throughout the state. And it's also designed to help reduce the amount of contamination in the recycling stream. It's hard to recycle the things that currently are recyclable if they're mixed in with lots of other stuff like batteries and dirty jars and hoses and plastic straws. So the state is really trying to define recyclability for consumers. And part of what we do with Stop Waste is we help then educate consumers and residents and community members in Alameda County about how to effectively handle those materials as well.
I want to hit on those materials, like the bag the spinach or the frozen mango is sold in kind of thing. The plastic bags that we buy, what do people do with those?
The produce bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, some materials like the ones you're talking about, where you're talking about pre-packaged produce that are on plastic bag. Yeah. So a couple of things. As of right now, the best thing you can do with that, if you cannot reuse it and it's not currently recyclable, then that bag belongs in the landfill. It belongs in the garbage. We want to avoid putting materials in the landfill to the degree that is appropriate to do so, and the degree that's possible. But I would rather you put something that's not recyclable in the garbage than I would then have you hope that it's recyclable and put it in the recycling bin. Because if you put something like that flimsy plastic in the recycling bin, what it ends up doing is it reduces the value of that recycling stream. It makes it more difficult for the brokers and the material recovery facilities to bail up all of the materials that are actually recyclable and then get a good price for them on the market. So we want to keep that stuff out of the recycling stream. The last thing I'll say about this, though, is that material that you're talking about, Jared, that packaging bag, that is exactly the type of material that is required under SB 54 to actually be recyclable or compostable by the year 2032. Over time, as SB 54 is implemented, you're going to see the materials in their grocery store or the market change. And you're already seeing producers and companies start to do this all over the country because of SB 54 in California. You're starting to see a lot of innovation. And I want to credit a lot of big companies and producers for the investment that they're making in making their packaging, reducing the volume of it, reducing the amount of plastic, and making it more recyclable and compostable over time. It takes a lot of investment. It takes a lot of engineering. I know packaging engineers, that's a job that many people have. There's going to be an increased demand for that type of job. I want to applaud producers of many types of packaging for the innovation that they're investing in now, but they should take responsibility for the end of life of the products that they're creating. And I think what that's going to mean over time is we're going to have a different experience when we walk in the grocery store.
Yeah, and I know you talked about the milk cartons. I think that's a big one that people probably often throw in the recycling, not the plastic ones, the semi-paper-esque one. Another one I see people do is ice cream containers. Ice cream containers are not recyclable. They're that waxy film on the inside. Soda cups from a restaurant. There's a lot more in the trash can, I think, than people realize. Want to come back to that question I have. What is the market with this influx of recycled material coming to your house, the packaging that is legitimately recyclable? What is the economic benefits of recycling it? Is there a market for that? Is there too much of it? Are we shipping it overseas? Help us understand that, Mark.
Let's start by talking about the economic impact of the way that we function now and how we design our materials now. Our economy right now is what we refer to as a very linear economy, right? So we extract resources from the earth to create a material, manufacture it, process it, transport it, send it to us where we use it. When we're done with it, we throw it away. And we refer to that as a take, make, and waste economy. It's a very linear flow where materials are flowing right through the economy, and then most of them are ultimately ending up in the landfill, or they're ending up in our streams, our rivers, on our sidewalks. Again, the main impact there is communities that can least afford to deal with that impact. We live in a very linear system right now. And if you think about it, if you go to a restaurant, and many of us had this experience, especially during COVID, and you get some to-go food and they put it in a big plastic container, how long are you using that plastic container? I mean, you could use that container literally for less than 5 minutes. If you think about all the fossil fuels and the petrochemicals and the other resources that go into producing that material, water, energy, all of it went to produce that material so it could be used for 5 minutes or less and thrown away. And if you think about just how economically wasteful that is, how much investment is needed to produce a single-use product, and how much that investment is then wasted within minutes. Part of what I like to talk about is how we are trying to harness the economic potential of reuse and repair. I mean, the vision we have at Stop Waste is an equitable circular economy where I can go to a restaurant, and instead of getting a single-use disposable plastic foodware, I can get a reusable product where the food is kept warm deliciously in a reusable piece of foodware, not something plastic or paper. I can use that material, that piece of foodware, and then I can return that to a central point where it's washed and recirculated and then used again. And the more you reuse a container like that, the more environmental benefits that it creates, the more economic benefits that it creates. So there's a lot of economic benefit in circularity. Now for recycling, what happens when something is recycled, you see the trucks come to your house and pick up your recycling bin, dump it in the truck. Those materials are then taken to a material recovery facility. And there the materials are sorted into different streams like plastic bottles and yogurt containers, like I mentioned, and they're packaged into these giant cube bales. And those bales are then sold and distributed into markets where that material can then be used to make a new material. And some of those markets are domestic in the US for paper, plastic, and aluminum and glass. And some of those markets are overseas. And I think one of the challenges that the recycling system has had over the years is that many consumers have sort of lost confidence about what happens to those materials once they're baled up and sold into those markets. And so what the laws that we've been talking about so far and the work that we do at Stop Waste is designed to do is to help, first of all, make sure that the streams of materials that are entering those facilities are cleaner. So we all have more understanding about what's actually recyclable. So that creates a better feedstock for new materials. Two is to infuse more transparency and accountability into the markets where all of these materials are going. And SB 54 has specific requirements for those end markets. They call them responsible end markets in SB 54. That all of those end markets where those materials ultimately go to be produced, to be used to create a new thing, they have to achieve specific environmental standards, workplace safety standards, and they have to achieve standards for the yield of material that comes out of that material that goes into that responsible end market. There's been a lot of confusion, a lack of transparency in the recycling system over time, but I have a lot of optimism that we're on the right track and that system is going to start to improve over time. Like we started the conversation, what do we say? That material is, that system is strained and imperfect, but it's striving to be better. And I have a lot of optimism that over time, because of progressive state and local policy, that system is becoming better over time.
Well, and I want to hammer on the fact for our listeners, two major benefits to the state. One, this is environmental, sustainable, reducing our trash waste. Two, justice, equity for people in those lower income neighborhoods where the facilities have been. And three, there is economic benefits because on top of the drivers picking up your trash, the more recycling, the more composting we're doing, the more in this stream, we are creating jobs here in California to deal with that are decent paying jobs throughout the entire state because they have to be in your community, and apparently at least 60% have to be accessible.
Absolutely. There is a whole economy that goes into the solid waste management system that we have now. And more, because of more responsibility on the producers, it starts with the innovation and the actual design of the products that we're using so that they're more easily repaired or reused. And then there's an investment in circularity systems within the cities that we live in. So for example, there's lots of innovation at schools right now, where instead of everything being single use in the cafeteria, there's more schools that are embracing reusable plates and reusable spoons and reusable trays. And there's companies that will come in and wash all of that stuff and bring it back to the school in a way that creates environmental benefits. There's infrastructure being created, jobs being created. And then there's a whole infrastructure downstream as well, collecting those recyclables, transporting them, processing them, marketing them, and ultimately creating new products. A more comprehensive infrastructure is really starting to emerge in our state. We have a long way to go, but it definitely gives me optimism that we're taking some good steps in the right direction. There's one other thing I wanted to mention, Jared.
Yeah.
I know many folks, like we've talked about, want to do the right thing with the materials that they consume, right? They want to be able to figure out, okay, how do I use less of this? How do I go upstream? Or how do I make sure that I'm recycling effectively? If you live in Alameda County or Contra Costa County, I want to point you to a tool that we created at Stop Waste that's designed to help residents, community members answer the question of, what can I do with this material when I'm done with it? Whether that be paint, old paint in my garage, or whether that be a pair of shoes that needs to be repaired, or whether it just be this plastic bottle, should it go in the recycling bin or not? And so that tool is called the Resource Guide. You can find it on any app store. It's RE:source, or you can just go to our website, www.stopwaste.org. And it's a really user-friendly tool. Jared, you should download it on your phone if you haven't already. I use it all the time. My wife uses it all the time. It's called Resource, and it helps us all answer that question with some clarity around what can I do with that thing when I'm done with it, and that creates the most environmental benefit.
Let's take that one step further. I'm out at a coffee shop and there's only one, maybe two bins. There's not all three bins. More so, I'm at a gas station. While I'm pumping the gas, I want to clean up all my kid junk from the car, but there's not even a recycling bin and there's always bottles in there. What do we do in those circumstances where it's not even accessible? Do we just have to really deal with it and take it home with us or what?
Well, it's a good question, and I've been in that situation. It's a shared experience. So one thing I might do, just as if I'm, visiting a store or something and I'm looking for a three bin system, what I often do, and I don't like to be the recycling police when I'm out with my family or something, but I will often ask the question like, oh, I'd really love to be able to, throw this food waste, this orange rind or something that I have that I'm done with into the compost. Do you have a third stream? Do you have a compost stream, a compost bin that I can put this in? And in doing so, it feels like I'm at least sending the signal that there's sort of consumer demand for having that infrastructure in that shop or in that restaurant. Restaurants and businesses, multifamily buildings throughout the state are required to have that three bin system. If you're a business that doesn't actually produce any organic waste, then you can apply for a waiver. But that's getting beside the point. What I would want to do is send a signal that that's something that people who visit that store want or there's demand for. Maybe even share some resources with them to help them meet that demand. Otherwise, if you could take it home and dispose of it when you get home, that might be a good option as well.
I appreciate that. Any last thoughts you want to leave guests with about the whole recycling, composting, full stream of materials that we've been talking about today?
I think the last thing I would say is that the vision that we have is of a more equitable and a more circular economy. And if we're able to achieve that vision, then that garbage stream, that garbage bin where we put materials that aren't recyclable or compostable, that really becomes the option of last resort, right? But in order to achieve that vision, what we have to do is we have to pass laws at the state level, at the local level, and we also have to build an infrastructure that makes it easier for all of us to make the right choice when we're around town. That example that you just provided about going to a store, going to the gas station, you know, we as consumers, we need the infrastructure to be able to do the right thing. It's like biking to work. I wouldn't expect everybody to bike to work if it feels unsafe for them to do so. Let's build bike lanes and bike infrastructure to make it as easy as possible to make that choice. Similarly, with circularity, let's make sure we support reuse and repair shops in our communities. Let's make sure that everybody has access to a compost bin, a recycling bin, and the garbage bin as a last resort. Let's make these options as easy as possible for the communities that we serve. And let's make sure that all of the work that we do benefit the people that have been burdened the most historically in our communities. Let's hold that central to our work as well. That's how we approach our work at Stop Waste. Like I said, we have a long to go, but I'm feeling optimism about the path that we're on.
I appreciate you being here, Timothy Burroughs from Stop Waste. Thank you.
It was a privilege to be with you, Jared. Thank you.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.